Not saying that Caleb's not their guy, but I think it's a really bad look that they did no due diligence on any other quarterback. And they told us this the day or two before the draft last year about not having anybody in on top 30s outside of Caleb, about not entertaining, doing your homework on any other quarterbacks, not sending your top decision makers to certain pro days. Not a good look for the Bears front office and for the coaching staff that's no longer there. But
Courtney, the story came out today from Seth Wickersham's book that will be coming out in September. The excerpts hit ESPN.com today, and it was about Caleb Williams and Carl Williams and how active they actually were before his visit to Hallis Hall of wanting to go elsewhere. And Caleb even admitted he wanted to go to the Vikings. What was your level of surprise, if any, reading this story today?
Not a lot of surprise, because if you guys remember, the week of the Combine in 2024, Pete Thamel wrote a story for ESPN.com where he talked to Caleb about the idea that was out there, because you just got to connect the dots here. There was the GQ article where his father, Carl Williams, talked about, trying to shake up the way that things are done in the NFL for rookies. And then the follow-up to that months later was this Pete Thamel story that kind of dispelled the notion that Caleb didn't want to go to the Bears. So Seth's reporting today it wasn't an excerpt. I mean, these quotes that were pulled from the book that comes out in September seems to point to somebody not telling the truth along the way, or somebody saying one thing and talking out of both sides of their mouth. So that's how I took it, because in Seth's reporting, it's Caleb and Carl Williams speaking about not wanting to go to Chicago, which I don't think his reasoning was flawed whatsoever at all. And I remember speaking with Caleb. It was March 1st, 2024. We're all at the Combine. We're waiting to speak to him. And, the question of Chicago comes up, and wanting to go to a place that does have, a bad history, a bad track record of developing quarterbacks. And, his whole thing, I can read this to you. It said, are you intimidated by the Bears quarterback history? And he said, not at all. I don't compare myself to the other guys that are there or have been there. I think I'm my own player. I tend to like to create history and rewrite history. So I think he came in with, with the mindset that he was going to go to whatever situation he was drafted into, because at some point they knew they couldn't fight it. Clearly they didn't find enough evidence to show them that they could circumvent the draft. So he went into it and tried to have a positive attitude, positive outlook about it. But I don't think his mindset, considering all the smoke that was there in the pre-draft process about him not wanting to go to Chicago, we've known that now for a while, despite what he even tried to say to dispel that notion back in March last year.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so this report, how do you think it plays going forward? What impact, if any, does it have, Courtney?
None. It shouldn't have any impact. Is he going to be asked about it? Of course. OTAs start next week. I don't know if he'll be available that day, but you can bet when he gets up at the podium, this stuff's going to come out. Because I'd like to know, the first thing I have is, how often did you bring this up to coaches about watching film by yourself and feeling that you were kind of left out, hung out to dry as a rookie, and you didn't have anybody guiding you? Because he's telling us all last year, I want to be held accountable. I've told the coaches, push me, coach me hard. Well, when they're not watching film with you, are you going to Ryan Poles about that? Are you going to Matt Eberflus about that? Is this just something that you decided to, all of a sudden reveal, or was this something that had been brought up and ignored? Because if that's the case, then that's a completely different story of negligence on the people who are the power makers inside Hallis Hall. But as far as it affecting him now, it's like a night and day thing. This was last year's regime. There's a reason that they brought in Ben Johnson, somebody who speaks the quarterback language, somebody who has a much better, well thought out plan for how he's going to develop Caleb Williams than the last staff.
Yeah, Courtney, along those lines too, we asked Ryan Poles, and I played it earlier at the Combine, about whispers, Kirk Herbstreit. Let me play this for you. This is what Kirk Herbstreit said on Thursday Night Football.
We've seen Caleb Williams tonight with his playmaking ability. Remember that low snap, and he was able to pick it up and locate a receiver and make a throw to Keenan Allen. And he just makes so many spectacular plays, and he's got such physical ability. I think the thing that remains to be seen, and only time will tell, is if he understands what it takes to be an NFL quarterback as far as the preparation, as far as first guy there, last guy to leave. And I'm not suggesting he's not doing those things, but just all of the little things that really make the great quarterbacks special.
Like, Kirk doesn't just pull that out of thin air and say,
No.
Like, so someone's feeding him that in the Bears locker room or the Bears facility. So my question is, when Poles says to us, he is a hard worker, he's the first in, he's the last out, but he needed to learn how to prepare differently for the NFL than in college. My question would be, why wasn't that corrected while it was going on?
Yeah, like it's a problem if that was left up to its own. If he was left up to his own devices of like, well, I'm going to teach myself this way. I think it's the right way. It's the way I've been doing it before. When the game is so much more complex, and if he doesn't know what he's seeing and doesn't have anybody to ask about that, then that's a problem. Obviously, you hear that, and it's so preposterous because it's like, well, where are these coaches? Nobody's watching film with Caleb in the quarterback's room. Like, where are they? And to the Herb Street point, because Silvy, I thought about that earlier. That was during the Seahawks game on Thursday Night Football. And I remember when that comment came out and some rumblings that I heard around that time. I'm like, well, what is he getting at? What is the undertone there of those comments? And the way it was put to me, it wasn't a knock against Caleb, but there was the natural comparison of where Jaden Daniels was well on his way to the playoffs at Week 17 at the time of that game, and where Caleb Williams and the Bears were, and the leadership that Jaden Daniels had shown in the building versus, there's all this talk. Coaches are leaving early. Caleb's showing up late. Like, I'm so tired of having to, like, micromanage people's, like, all of us trying to feel like we need to micromanage people's schedules. Like, that's really a lame part of, I think, this whole storyline of, like, was he in the building? Were the coaches there? Like, either way, bottom line, no, people weren't doing their jobs. Like, and that falls on the quarterback, but that also falls on the coaching staff. And more so if the coaching staff is not teaching Caleb, if there's not a hands-on approach, then no wonder he failed. I mean, he still had a pretty good season, but no wonder he failed by meeting his expectations last year, which is, a problem. And if they can't remedy that, then you have to ask, did they have the right people in charge? Clearly they didn't, because they fired the offensive coordinator after Week 10, and they fired Eberflus after the Detroit game. So I wonder, the timing, because I don't exactly know when. Seth obviously verified that information. He went to Jacksonville this offseason, I believe it was February, and talked with Caleb. The stuff that was going in his book, like, just making sure it was all accurate. And, like, I to his credit, and I know that he talked with you about this too, like, him and Caleb and Carl stood by what they said with all of this. I don't know if it was too little too late when Thomas Brown took over and put himself in a position to try to fix Caleb, but the study habits are things that get picked up now. Learning how to watch film happens now. Like, you better know how to do that before training camp comes around, because there's so many other things you have to do. So that's the reason I feel like it's last year's news, but it is kind of damning that if the Bears, if their side of it, if they let this thing perpetuate and didn't step in to intervene, then that does feel negligent.
In Silvy's conversation with Seth, Seth talked about how in Kansas City it was tremendously valuable for Patrick Mahomes to have Alex Smith there to help him kind of learn how to watch the film and be a professional quarterback. I'm not suggesting, Courtney, that the Bears are in a reflexive way bringing in Case Keenum because of what happened last year. Do you think, just kind of in a general sense, this is just who Ben Johnson is? He is going to bring as much experience and as much help to the quarterback room for his young guy, and that's why Keenum was signed?
I think that it's absolutely a reflection of what what Caleb didn't have in the room last year, to have a veteran like Case Keenum in there. I think it's a complete course correct. So I think that your first part of that observation is right. Like this, that it is based on that. Obviously, Ben Johnson speaks the quarterback language. That's what he's known for. We saw how he turned around Jared Goff's career. Like, the track record is there. But there was no veteran voice in the room, and there are reasons why that was the case last year. Obviously, Caleb comes in here unquestioned as the starter. Eberflus names him QB1 before he steps on the field for his rookie mini camp practice, his first one. And I quoted Ryan Poles on this on a story that I wrote right after owners meetings, kind of about what the plan is for Caleb. There were times last year where they might have babied him along in the process, where they were probably worried too much about feelings, too much about how perception would be. If you bring somebody in, is Caleb going to feel challenged? Looking over his shoulder at somebody trying to take his job and trying to make the quarterback room as non-threatening as possible. I don't think that helped him. Not that Tyson Bagent can't be a great teacher, but he's young. Not that Austin Reed can't pick up and help his teammate, but he's young too, and he's an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, both of them are.
They needed veteran voices in there, somebody who'd done it multiple places and had, look what he did for C.J. Stroud. I think they looked at Houston and were like, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we consider doing the same thing for Caleb Williams this year, considering what he didn't have a year ago?
Well, one thing I don't understand, Courtney, and Seth doesn't know this because he's not in our world of covering the Bears. He was doing this from Caleb and Carl's perspective, so he doesn't know what went in because he responded to me, you're going to have to ask Matt Eberflus. But understanding the story like you do, being around that team every single day, Courtney, if Caleb if he had questions about Shane Waldron, which he made apparent, he turned to somebody and he said, I don't think I could do it with Waldron. And the Bears knew that Caleb was their guy. Why didn't they, when they went down the offensive coordinator road, get someone who would have a good working relationship with Caleb? And why not check about Waldron?
Because I think the person who would have had the best working relationship with Caleb Williams would have been a threat to the head coach, and the head coach did not respect what Cliff Kingsbury brought to the table as an offensive coordinator. I think that is a mindset shared by other defensive coaches in the league, that this is a gimmicky offense and blah, blah, blah. Well, look what it did for Jaden Daniels. Mm-hmm. Cliff Kingsbury would have been the person to pair Caleb Williams with, because they went out on their 2-week tour where they took the private jet and went to the West Coast to interview all these people. They interviewed 9 people for that OC job, and you came up with Shane Waldron, who, we had the indication of what this was going to be when he goes on Chuggo at the Super Bowl, or rather when Jackson Smith and Jigba goes on the CHGO podcast,
right,
the Super Bowl a year ago, and had nothing positive to say. That wasn't a Freudian, or that was not a Freudian slip, but that's truly how he felt about it, and he had him for 1 year. I think that Matt Eberflus, in job preservation mode and knowing that he was, coaching for his career last year, I don't think he wanted to bring somebody in that was going to be a potential easy replacement at head coach. And he ended up screwing himself over anyways, based on, his whole philosophy of dying with the lie last year. That is the reason that they went with Shane Waldron. Shane Waldron was non-threatening to the head coach, and it was a poor choice very clearly, because even back at this time last year, there were questions, stuff that you find out after the fact when people aren't afraid to talk about it anymore. Like, is he the right fit? Is he going to be able to challenge? Is this offense too challenging for Caleb? The progression-based offense, was the right structure in place for the quarterback from a teaching perspective for him to get his career off the ground? The answer is no. Pairing him with Cliff would have been the better option, but they obviously went a different way with that.
Shane was not a threat to opposing defenses either.
Yeah, no.
Correct. The biggest thing I came away with when the quote about Ryan Poles telling Caleb, we're drafting you no matter what, not saying that Caleb's not their guy, but I think it's a really bad look that they did no due diligence on any other quarterback. And they told us this the day or two before the draft last year about not having anybody in on top 30s outside of Caleb, about not entertaining, doing your homework on any other quarterbacks, not sending your top decision makers to certain pro days. That's a lesson in not putting your eggs all in one basket. Now, might this work out? Very well could, and it can pay off, but it just that to me is not a good look for the Bears front office and for the coaching staff that's no longer there. But what the people who are still there, of not having gone through the process of having a plan B, a plan C, Caleb might have been your guy all along, but that should not take you out of at least talking and doing research on other quarterbacks to make sure that you are making the right choice.
Courtney, your thoughts on the schedule release and what is ahead for this Bears team?
Brutal. It's a tough stretch. I think the balance of the NFC North games is better than it was last year, obviously, having, Minnesota at home to start out, and then go into Detroit for Ben Johnson's homecoming in week 2. But there's not a lot of stretches in there that are gimmies. And obviously, not often do you see that in the NFL, but I look at the Bills' schedule. I look at a couple other teams, and wow, they got off a lot easier than the Bears did, but the Bears have the second hardest strength of schedule. So I'm not surprised by it at all. I think that we'll know, though, by that week 11 to week 14 stretch where it's at Minnesota, and then they've got Pittsburgh, and then they go to play the Philadelphia Eagles, and they've got Green Bay. Like, that's to me is where, if they're going to be in the hunt graphic, like, how they handle that stretch is going to determine that.
Anything else, Courtney? That
I have a question for her before she leaves.
Go ahead.
No, I want her to get her football thoughts out before I ask her a silly question.
It's
anything else?
No, I mean, I think that this is the big story of the day. Now, will it, I don't think, again, I know that there's some Bears fans who are like, why is this being brought up? It's part of a bigger book. Seth came up to me in Palm Beach and was telling me about, this will eventually be something that comes out. But the book doesn't come out till September. The Caleb stuff is newsworthy because it's dealing with what his father said he wanted to do all along, with circumventing the rookie wage scale and thinking that it's not fair for players. But, I don't know if anybody's we've seen, we've had breadcrumbs all along the way. He and Rome were the last two to sign their contracts of anybody in the rookie class last year, leading into when they reported for training camp. What PFT reported about how he was trying to get paid as an LLC, trying to be creative. None of this should surprise anybody, because there have been breadcrumbs the entire time that he's been a Bear that have shown you he's trying to do things differently than other quarterbacks have in the past, and that he felt that he had the carte blanche to do it. But it is interesting coming off of the Shedeur Sanders stuff, different caliber player, but there's a lot of noise about how Shedeur handled the pre-draft process and maybe telling teams he didn't want to go there and purposely trying to put himself somewhere else by how he handled interviews. We're kind of seeing the same thing, at least based on this reporting from Seth, that Caleb was, working his own way behind the scenes up until a certain point of trying to figure out how can I do the same. So I just think it's interesting because I haven't heard that many people talk about the Shedeur thing today, but I know during the time of the draft, he was being talked about as, well, hey, Caleb Williams and his people were doing the same thing. How come they're not getting as much criticism? Again, different player.
Because of the talent.
Different caliber of player can get away with certain things, but it just shows you no one's getting away with it. It's in place for a reason. The owners ratified this CBA in 2020, and even before that with the rookie wage scale, because they don't want to deal with what they had pre-2011. So that's kind of the way that I put a bow on it, that, there are others who have tried this too, varying degrees.
Okay.